Hi, Len. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
Good. You ready for some questions?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's start off with, when did you start writing?
Started writing seriously in the mid-1960s. High school, I got interested in writing poetry, tried a little bit of fiction, but wasn't really happy with what I was doing. And, it just sort of took off from there.
What do you write?
Over the last almost 50 years, I've written history, I have written poetry, fiction, newspaper, magazine articles. I'm happy to write almost anything. Mostly I write fiction and poetry, though.
Where have you been published?
All over the place. My work has appeared in about 40 different journals and magazines over the years. I've got 6 books out in the field of history. I've got a chapbook out in poetry. And I've been published all over the world.
What are your writing habits? Like when and where do you write?
Don't have any fixed habits. That's part of the problem of having a regular day job. I write what I can when I can. I take a lot of notes, planning on writing more when I retire in a few years. And it's pretty much when the mood is favorable and the time is favorable.
Pen, paper, computer?
Anything I can get my hands on. I like computers best because I can edit as I'm writing much easier than I can even in the old days with a typewriter. I usually carry a notebook and a pen with me along with a camera, record ideas in one form or another, but overall I prefer the computer. My brain and my fingers can keep up with each other that way.
And how often do you write?
Sometimes I'll write every day, sometimes I'll go a week or 2 weeks without writing anything. Yeah, an awful lot depends on the demands of the rest of my life.
Whose writing are you most influenced by?
Since we're talking about fiction mostly today, I'm influenced by Ray Bradbury, Edgar Allan Poe, the great science fiction and mystery writers. As far as more traditional literary fiction writers, Grace Paley, people like that. I started reading before I started school, and when I was in 3rd grade, I was reading out of the adult section of the library, so I've got a long history of being influenced by others. Part of it is that I'm influenced both ways. If I read something that I don't care for, that can have as much of an influence on me as reading something that I want to go back and read over and over and over again. It influences my thinking, it influences my writing.
Who are your favorite writers?
Bradbury, Brodigan, Isaac Asimov, again, people like Grace Paley. A lot of relatively unknown writers who came particularly out of World War II and wrote fiction, wrote some great novels and never wrote again, and therefore are relatively unknown.
Who do you aspire to be like?
I don't aspire to be like anybody. I want to do my own writing. When I was in 5th grade, we had writing assignments in school, and the idea was to copy another writer's work and change it just a little bit so you think it was your own. And I was never really happy with that. I've always wanted to be myself when I wrote.
Which writers would you identify as similar to you?
I don't know that there are any. Partially I'm not famous enough to be compared to other writers, and partially because, again, aspiring to be myself, I don't see myself standing in comparison with anybody. It's not a competition. It's not a race to see who can be better known or anything like that.
If you were doing one of those Amazon lists, if you like Lennart Lundh, you'll like this, who would they pick?
I would love to think that they would pick people like Bradbury. I keep going back to Bradbury because his writing is so lyrical. He and Patricia McKillop are probably my two favorite writers in the area of science fiction and fantasy, because the magic is right there in their words and in their descriptions and their characterizations. So I'd be tickled pink if somebody would pick my name to be read after they read their work.
What was the inspiration for your short story, Antique Shopping?
Antique Shopping, which is appearing in Arachne Press's anthology Weird Lies this fall, and is really the reason we're doing this interview today, was inspired simply by a very, very nice late October day in the Midwest, which is where the story starts. I generally, almost exclusively, don't think about writing a story to a specific theme or about something in particular. I'll see something, I'll hear something, it'll start bouncing around in my mind, and I start telling myself the story at the same time that I'm writing it. That was the whole impetus for Antique Shopping, was that very nice day. And I just let what was going to happen next happen, and I was as surprised, I suspect, as any of my readers might be at how the story develops and how it ends.
Why do you think the material comes to you with such apparent ease?
That's a question my friend Wayne Mutza has asked me, and I think it's because I don't force my writing to happen. I am very careful with the finished result. I will let it be. I'll go through and revise and revise and revise until it sounds right in my ears. That is not a lot of apparent ease, or a lot of ease, no matter what the appearances are. It's just a very, very careful process to make it all seem natural.
What's the drive once the ideas are in your head?
I want to know how the story ends. We grow up with being told stories. We grow up being read to at night. We grow up with stories on television. And because I don't know for sure what's going to happen myself until I'm doing the writing and it develops, the biggest drive is to find out what's going on and find out how it's all going to end.
It's said that writing, putting your soul into words, and those words in front of people, is very courageous. How do you feel about that?
I understand where that question comes from, and that comes from another friend of ours, Marcy Kaplan. At this point, after almost 50 years of being published as a writer, I don't have any fears about writing. I don't have any fears about what I'm putting on paper. I don't have any fears about rejection, because the editor that rejects my work today will probably take something from me later on if I'm doing my work right. And the fact that he's rejected a story doesn't mean that somebody else won't pick it up. I've had stories go to a dozen editors before they found the right home. So at this point in my life, there's no courage involved. Starting out, yeah, rejection is something you got to get used to. You've got to stop thinking of it as rejection. You just have to think of it as a response in a business transaction. And I think younger writers probably evolve themselves with more courage than other people do as they've more matured.
What are your ambitions as a writer?
First ambition is to keep on writing. As long as my brain and my fingers will connect. Near term, short term, I've got a collection of stories I'd like to see get published. I've got a couple of collections of poetry I'd like to see get published. I'm not terribly interested in fame, and I know very well that there's no fortune involved in what I do. I'm not even all that ambitious about the idea of writing a novel as an outgrowth of being a writer. I think my attention span for a story is probably too short for that. So, bottom line, keep on writing and hopefully keep on getting published.
Thank you.
My pleasure, thank you.
Just hit the button.
Mm-hmm.